In 2016, Mary J. Blige was writing a check for $30,000 every single month, not for a mortgage, not for a tour. For a man who had been her husband, her manager, and, according to court documents, had been quietly funneling her money toward another woman for years. At the same time, the IRS was knocking nearly $3 million in back taxes, public hearings, brutal headlines. The fall of an icon. But here's what those headlines missed. They were watching the wrong woman. Because 6 years later, Mary J. Blige stood at the center of the Super Bowl halftime show, streamed by over 100 million people, performing in custom Moschino, not broken, not fallen, rebuilt. This is not a comeback story. Comebacks are for people who quit. This is how Mary J. Blige turned the worst chapter of her life into a $20 million empire, quietly, while the world wasn't watching, where it all began. To understand how far she has come, you have to understand where she started. January 11th, 1971, the Bronx, New York. Mary Jane Blige came into a world that did not make things easy. Her early years moved between Savannah, Georgia, and the housing projects of Yonkers, New York. Two very different places that shared one common thread: hardship. Her mother worked as a nurse. Her father was a jazz musician and a Vietnam veteran, a man carrying wounds that the war had carved too deep. He struggled, and eventually, he left. Music didn't arrive as ambition. It arrived as survival. School never felt safe for Mary. By 11th grade, she dropped out not because she was giving up, but because the weight she was already carrying was heavier than anything a classroom could hold. She joined a local group in Yonkers called Pride, and one afternoon at a recording booth in a mall, she recorded a rough cover of Anita Baker's Caught Up in the Rapture. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. That tape found its way to Jeff Redd at Uptown Records, who passed it to label founder Andre Harrell. In 1989, at just 18 years old, Mary J. Blige signed with Uptown, becoming the youngest artist on the label and its first female singer. She was assigned to work with a young producer named Sean Combs, and what they built together was unlike anything the music industry had heard before. The crown nobody handed her. When What's the 411 dropped in 1992, radio didn't know what to do with it. Hip-hop beats colliding with gospel-rooted vocals. Street pain meeting soul confession. It climbed to number 6 on the Billboard 200. It went triple platinum. It earned 2 Soul Train Music Awards. And just like that, without a marketing campaign or a manufactured image, the world gave her a title, the Queen of Hip-Hop Soul. But the crown came with a cost. Her follow-up album, My Life, released in 1994, was something different entirely. It wasn't an album in the traditional sense. It was a confession. Pages torn from the diary of a young woman in deep pain, battling addiction, toxic relationships, and a darkness that she hadn't yet found her way out of. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, number 1 on the R&B charts, and years later, Time magazine would name it one of the greatest albums of all time. For millions of listeners, it wasn't just music, it was proof that pain could be transformed into something that outlives the moment it was born from. Over the next 2 decades, Mary built one of the most consistent catalogs in music history: 15 studio albums, an estimated 50 to 80 million records sold worldwide. Anthems, Family Affair, Be Without You, Real Love, No More Drama that became permanently woven into the fabric of American culture. 9 Grammy Awards, 4 American Music Awards, 12 Billboard Music Awards. She wasn't just collecting trophies. She was building a legacy that could not be undone. At peak periods, music-related earnings alone were reported to reach hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. Touring revenue from major world tours routinely pushed her annual income into the millions. She was, without question, one of the highest-earning artists of her generation. She wasn't just an artist, she was an industry. The marriage, the manager, and the unraveling. But money, no matter how much of it there is, cannot protect you from the wrong people. In 2003, Mary married Kendu Isaacs, a man who quickly became both her husband and her manager. On the surface, it looked like a partnership, a power couple. A love story built inside the music business. What it actually was took years to fully come into focus. By 2016, Mary filed for divorce, and what followed was one of the most painful and public financial unravelings any artist of her stature had ever endured in full view of the media. The divorce proceedings revealed a picture that was hard to look at. Court documents showed that Mary had been paying Isaacs a management fee while he allegedly used funds to support another woman. The alimony figure that came out of the settlement, $30,000 per month. At the same time, the IRS had come calling. Years of financial mismanagement had resulted in a federal tax debt estimated at nearly $3 million. Legal fees mounted. The hearings stretched on. And every week, a new headline appeared somewhere summarizing the situation in the cruelest shorthand possible. She was called broke. She was called reckless. She was called a cautionary tale. There was a particularly brutal irony buried in all of this. Mary had spent her entire career singing about surviving pain. Her audience loved her because she had always been honest about how hard life can be. And now the very vulnerabilities she had turned into art, the trust, the love, the opening of her heart had been used against her in the most calculated way imaginable. She had built something enormous, and someone she trusted had quietly taken an axe to the foundation. But she kept working. Because Mary J. Blige had been surviving since before she could vote, a tax bill and a bad marriage, as devastating as they were not going to be the thing that ended her. Acting was always the secret weapon. What happened next didn't make as many headlines as the crisis did. It rarely does. While the tabloids were still writing about her debt, Mary was in production for a film called Mudbound. She wasn't playing a singer. She wasn't playing a version of herself. She was playing Florence Jackson, a dignified, weathered black woman living in the Mississippi Delta in the 1940s. A woman with no glamour, no spotlight, and no safety net. Sound familiar? The performance she delivered was extraordinary. Critics called it transformative. Awards, voters noticed. By early 2018, Mary J. Blige had received Golden Globe, Critics' Choice, and Academy Award nominations for Best Supporting Actress. She became the first person in Oscar history to be nominated in both an acting category and original song in the same year. That is not the resume of someone who is falling apart. But the truth is, acting was never just a pivot. Mary had been moving in that direction for years. A guest appearance on The Jamie Foxx Show, a recurring role on a stage production. Small film appearances that suggested she had more range than anyone was giving her credit for. Mudbound proved it definitively, and Hollywood paid attention. Around the same time, her role in the Starz drama Power Book II, Ghost, gave her a new generation of fans and a new, steady income stream. She plays Monet Tejada, a sharp, calculating, emotionally complex matriarch who runs her family's criminal empire with both iron authority and wounded love. The character required a kind of layered performance that many doubted she could deliver. She delivered it flawlessly. Television projects like Power provide recurring earnings through multi-season contracts, syndication deals, and streaming distribution. Reports suggested her earnings from the show alone reached up to $400,000 per season. Combined with her music royalties, that number represents exactly the kind of diversified income that protects a career from the unpredictability of the music business. Building the empire, brick by brick. Let's talk about the money, because this is where the real story of the rebuild lies. Mary J. Blige's net worth is currently estimated at close to $22 million. That number is not a legacy holdover from her peak years. It is an active figure built from multiple streams that she has deliberately constructed over the last decade. Music royalties remain a cornerstone. Her back catalog, which spans more than 3 decades and includes some of the most streamed R&B titles of the streaming era, generates passive income around the clock. Every time Family Affair plays in a film, a commercial, or a streaming playlist, a check moves in her direction. Then there is touring. Mary has never stopped performing. Her ability to headline major venues and music festivals has not diminished with time, if anything. The nostalgia premium that comes with an artist of her generation has made her a more valuable live act than ever. Her recent tours have grossed tens of millions of dollars across multiple legs. But two ventures in particular tell the story of how deliberately she has reconstructed her financial life. The first is the Strength of a Woman Festival and Summit, which Mary launched and has grown into one of the most significant annual cultural events honoring Black women in the country. Held in Atlanta, Georgia, it combines a multi-day music festival with a wellness and empowerment summit. In its peak years, the event has drawn tens of thousands of attendees and generated millions in revenue through ticket sales, sponsorships, and brand partnerships. The name is not accidental. It is the title of her 2017 album, the first album she released after her divorce was finalized. It was, in every way, a mission statement, and she turned that mission statement into a business. The second is real estate. Mary's move to New Jersey was not just a lifestyle decision. It was a strategic financial repositioning. She now lives in a property in the Cresskill area, a quiet upscale community in Bergen County, a home that reflects her current values: privacy, stability, peace. But beyond her personal residence, Mary has made documented moves in the real estate market over the years, acquiring and selling properties at significant profit. Real estate is, historically, one of the most reliable tools wealthy individuals use to preserve and grow capital outside of the volatility of the entertainment industry. For Mary, it represented something more personal too: ownership, control, a roof that no one could take from her, the deals, the brand, and the quiet power moves. There is another layer to Mary's empire that rarely gets discussed, and that is her value as a brand. Fashion houses don't dress just anyone for the Super Bowl. When Moschino outfitted Mary for the halftime show, it wasn't charity. It was a calculated business decision by a luxury label that understood what Mary J. Blige represents to a specific, powerful, and deeply loyal demographic. That visibility translates directly into commercial value. Over her career, Mary has held endorsement and partnership deals with companies including Burger King, Carol's Daughter, the beloved Black-owned beauty brand, and several fashion labels. In 2021, she launched her own Passionné Rosé wine, partnering with a premium wine producer to create a brand that speaks directly to her audience and her personal aesthetic. The celebrity wine and spirits market has proven to be one of the most lucrative side ventures available to high-profile entertainers, with successful brands generating millions in annual revenue. She also extended into fragrance, with her My Life perfume line, connecting her most iconic album title to a consumer product, a smart piece of brand architecture that reinforces her legacy while generating new income. Each of these moves, taken individually, might look like simple celebrity licensing. Taken together, they represent a portfolio strategy. Mary is not just lending her name to products. She is building assets, the Super Bowl and what it really meant. February 13, 2022, SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. Dr. Dre headlined. Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, and 50 Cent all shared the stage. It was a historic night by any measure, widely considered the greatest Super Bowl halftime performance in the history of the event. And standing at the center of it, in silver and white Moschino, performing Be Without You and Family Affair to a global audience of over 100 million people, was Mary J. Blige. The cultural conversation that night was enormous. But what the entertainment industry noticed quietly in the days that followed was the business conversation. Streaming numbers for Mary's catalog spiked dramatically in the hours after the performance. Monthly listeners on Spotify surged. Album sales across digital platforms jumped. A single halftime slot, one that the NFL reportedly compensated participating artists for, at meaningful rates, generated a measurable and lasting bump across her entire commercial footprint. That is the compounding power of a legacy act with a catalog deep enough to absorb a moment like that. Younger artists get a halftime show and sell a few thousand more copies of their latest single. Mary got a halftime show and activated 30 years of music for an entirely new audience. She had also, in a very public way, delivered an answer to every headline that had called her fallen. Life in New Jersey, on her own terms. The home in Cresskill tells you a lot about who Mary J. Blige is now. She has spoken in interviews about her deliberate move away from the chaos, the industry noise, the social obligations, the performance of celebrity. New Jersey, for her, is not a compromise. It is a choice. It is where she goes to be a person rather than an icon. She wakes up early. She works out. Fitness and sobriety have been central pillars of her life since she made the decision to get clean. She has been open about her journey with alcohol and substance use, and about the therapy and spiritual practice that have helped her build and sustain her peace of mind. She spends time with her dogs. She reads. She tends to her space with intention. There is something quietly radical about that image. A woman who has been one of the most commercially successful artists of her generation, choosing to define success on her own terms, not by the size of her entourage, not by the frequency of her press appearances, but by the quality of her days. She has said publicly that she is the happiest she has ever been. And when you look at the trajectory from the Yonkers projects, to the Uptown Records signing, to the billion-stream catalogs, to the divorce, to the debt, to the Oscar nomination, to the Super Bowl, to the rosé wine and the festival and the New Jersey home, that statement lands with the full weight of everything it took to get there. The blueprint. Here is the thing about Mary J. Blige's financial story that almost nobody talks about. She is not wealthy despite everything she went through. She is wealthy because of how she responded to it. The divorce forced a financial reckoning that, while devastating, also gave her something she had never fully had before: complete control. When Kendu Isaacs was no longer her manager, Mary had to build a new team, a new structure, and a new strategy. She had to get into the room and understand the numbers herself. She had to make the decisions. That accountability, however painfully it arrived, was the turning point. She diversified. She invested. She turned her most famous album into a festival brand. She turned her sobriety into a public identity that made her more marketable, not less. She turned her acting ambitions into a second career that now runs parallel to her music and amplifies it. She turned her taste for fine things into a wine label. She turned her love of fashion into long-term brand relationships with luxury houses. Every move was intentional. None of it was accidental. And through all of it, she chose New Jersey, chose quiet, chose mornings with her dogs over nights at industry parties, chose building over performing wealth, chose peace. That is the quiet wealth model in its purest form. Not flashy, not loud, not designed for the timeline, designed to last. She made the pain into a blueprint. There is a line from one of Mary's most personal interviews where she talks about the hardest years of her life, the addiction, the bad relationships, the financial crisis, and she says something that stops you cold. She says, "Everything I went through, I survived it, and now I use it." That is not a passive statement. That is a philosophy. Mary J. Blige did not survive her pain by setting it aside. She survived it by turning it into fuel. Her albums were therapy before therapy was fashionable. Her festival was community before community building was a brand strategy. Her sobriety was self-preservation before wellness was an industry. She was doing all of it first. She was doing all of it for real. From a Bronx childhood where music was a way out, to the stages of Madison Square Garden, to a divorce that cost her $30,000 a month, to an Oscar nomination, to a Super Bowl spotlight, to a $22 million empire run quietly from a home in New Jersey. Mary J. Blige did not just survive. She made her pain into a blueprint. And the blueprint works.